it wasn't working for me. I needed something much, much slower. So eventually, I stopped going to therapy, not necessarily by my own decision. It's kind of funny, kind of not funny. My therapist essentially ghosted me. I had to reschedule one of our appointments so that I could attend some workshop for my major. And I guess when she rescheduled me, she never put me in the system. So that appointment never came. And I just kind of took it as a sign to reflect on my therapy experience, and I decided to just not reach out about it and take matters into my own hands, so to speak. And that's when I kind of started to do research. I started to buy some books that might help, like self-help books. I started journaling. And this, I believe, is when I truly started doing the work to address my social anxiety. Because although I do think exposure therapy was part of that, what I really needed at that point in time was to understand myself. For some people, maybe exposure therapy, just jumping into it, will help. But for me, I think I really needed to understand myself. I needed to understand where this anxiety was coming from. And that led me to explore my core beliefs, the beliefs that I have about myself. And this can range from so many things. You know, maybe you believe that you are not an outgoing person. You believe that you're not an attractive person. You believe that you're not an intelligent person. We all have these beliefs about ourselves, right? And in my research, I was kind of learning that in our childhood, we have, or in our lives in general, we have these experiences. Maybe it's a one-off experience. Maybe it's a pattern or a chain of experiences that lead us to believe something about ourselves, right? If one of our friends is always late to our hangouts, then maybe that means that I'm a boring person, or I'm not interesting, I'm not worthy of punctuality or reliability, all those sorts of things. Things like that lead us to believe things about ourselves, okay? And that's natural. That's how we survive as humans, right? We absorb affirming this belief about myself. Forgiving them because they probably didn't know the extent of that, the extent that that would have an effect on me. Because in the case with my teachers, they just wanted to do their job, you know. So I forgave them for that. But another part of it was situations that make such a huge difference, because the more you do them, they accumulate, and they build your confidence, they build your pattern recognition, and it prepares you for more intense, or what's the word I'm looking for? More demanding social interactions, like making a friend or going on a date. These situations require more back and forth, it requires sharing a lot about yourself. But when you practice with these smaller situations, you set yourself up for success in those bigger situations. And like I said, you're going to have awkward moments. You're going to feel anxious. But sometimes